guests here in person and also our guests joining us online. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank everyone, particularly our panelists here. I'll do full introductions as each of them speak, but just to get us started, Emmanuel Katongole is from the University of Notre Dame, just not too far off from here. Liz O'Donnell Gandolfo is at Wake Forest University. And then Debra Dean Murphy from West Virginia Wesleyan College. So we'll have all of them coming up in a couple minutes. You probably know the format, but if you're just joining online or just joining for this session, each panelist will speak for about 20 minutes or so. I'll introduce each one just before they're about to speak. And then, of course, we'll have a decent amount of time for Q&A, which I think will be quite interesting. I'll be inviting questions for the audience, and of course, we'll both here and also the Facebook audience. So let me introduce our first speaker. Emmanuel Katongole is a Catholic priest ordained in 1987 for the Archdiocese of Kampala, Uganda. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the Catholic University in Louvain, Belgium. He serves as professor of theology and peace studies in the Code School, University of Notre Dame, and is extraordinary professor of ecclesiology at the University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. Before joining Notre Dame in 2013, he served as associate professor of theology and world Christianity at Duke University and is founding co-director of the Duke Center for Reconciliation. He has authored many books on Christian social science imagination, the crisis of faith following the Rwandan genocide, and the Christian approaches to peace, justice, and reconciliation. Among these books are The Sacrifice of Africa, A Political Theology for Africa, in 2011, Who Are My People? Love, Violence, and Christianity in Sub-Saharan Africa, 2022. Additionally, he is co-founder and president of the Bethany Land Institute, an educational program in rural Uganda dedicated to forming the poor and excluded in the practices, lifestyle, and spirituality of sustainable land care, food production, and economic expertise. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Mark, for your introduction. Thank you, Bill, and your team for inviting me again to be back at DePaul. I love DePaul very much. I've been reminding some of the fellows at the Center for World Catholicism that I was the first fellow here, sometime back, even before Bill. And so for that, I'm very grateful. Thank you all, and good afternoon to you all. And what a stimulating conversation that we are having about hope. What I would like to do for my session is to share a little bit about hope from the point of view of the work that I am engaged in at Bethany Land Institute in Uganda. And from there, offer a few reflections of what I am learning in the process of that work. This is important because as I listened to the reflection this morning, wonderful panel this morning, the sense of performativity, the sense of engagement, of presence, of work, I think it becomes so important. So hope has been a constant theme of my own scholarship. In various books, I've reflected on what does hope look like? What is the meaning of hope? How does Christian faith on the continent of Africa contribute to this movement of hope? So I've always been engaged in research, in scholarship about hope. More recently, I've been also thinking more, following all this, thinking more about hope and coming more and more to the conviction about hope, not as a sentiment that is out there, hope not as a feeling that we have, whether it is internal here or elsewhere, but hope more as action, hope as a verb, hope as doing, as work. So the question of hope really is not so much whether you are feeling hope or not feeling hope, or whether you have hope or you don't have hope, but a question of what is it that you are doing? What is it that you are willing to commit to be engaged in? So this is kind of connected really to the importance of care. What do you care about? And how it is in the process of that care and engagement and action that hope is generated. So kind of really thinking more about hope as action, as work. And so my reflection this afternoon actually is about the work of hope, or hope as work. And I'd find no better way to kind of introduce this than to share a little bit about the work that I'm currently engaged in at Bethany Land Institute in Uganda, and what that is teaching me about this notion of hope. So Bethany Land Institute, at Bethany Land Institute, we are working with young people in rural communities, ready to implement Laudato Si, Pope's Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, with the hope that doing so will transform the rural communities. Born and raised in Uganda, I've been many times back and forth, and even though I know from a theological point of view that God's dream for the world, for Africa, is this incredible dream of a new creation, flourishing communities, these are some of the images that I see as I move back and forth on the African continent, not only in my own place of birth, Malube, the village where I was born. And so the first picture to the far left, actually, is a picture that was taken from my home village. When I was growing up, that was a natural forest. It was beautiful. There was a stream in the middle of the forest. We used to go down there and draw water. Now that has all been destroyed. What you see is the excavation of the sand, and the beauty is destroyed. The water is gone. The deforestation that is underway. And with that, you can see the effect on the food crops in the villages. This is an image that many people see of that deforestation. But with that also seeing the number of young people moving from the villages because they feel a sense of there's nothing to do in the villages, and the promise, education promise, that the modernity, civilization, all the good things happen in the city, jobs and things like that. But of course they never really end up in the city, but on the outskirts of the city, and so the slums growing at a terrific rate, especially in Africa. And so when you really now imagine an image of the poverty in Africa, it is actually the many young people in the slums without jobs. You can see the question that is raising on the faces of many of these young people. A question mark actually about identity. Who am I? What is there for me? What's the future? And so many of those kind of questions. So you can already see from some of these images, the interrelated issues that kind of give rise to the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth. That from many peace studies point of view, that is being described as slow violence that kind of moves on many times undetected until now and again it erupts in what we see as manifest violence, but for the most part it remains undetected. And if you connect that with the global warming, climate change, and so forth. So the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. In 2012, when I was celebrating 25 years, I was just so much kind of really angered with the people cutting down the forest. Every time I would go to visit my family, would stop them, would argue with them, but I was feeling the anger actually welling up in me. And I said, this cannot go on. I need to channel this anger into something. So I went to a friend and said, I need to buy 10 acres of land and plant a forest, a natural forest. And he started talking to me, that's Cornelius in the black shirt, about education. The mindset needs to change. Young people need to be educated in appreciating even rural life. And our friend Tony, who is a business person, said, well, economics matters. You may plant all the trees that you want, but unless there is an economic dimension, Laudato Si, cry of the earth, cry of the poor, everything is interconnected. We need integrated approaches. So the notion of integral ecology, as it emerged from this essay, was fascinating to me, and trying to find out what is this integrated approach that not only cares for the poor, also the environment, restores human dignity, and how does it look like? And when he makes a claim in paragraph 111, that this cannot be just fulfilled, realized through a technocratic approach. We cannot just engineer our way out of the crisis. We need a distinctive way of looking at things, mindset, a way of thinking, education program, a lifestyle, spirituality. My practical, what does this look like? In a place like Uganda, where the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And so I called my friend and said, hey, this thing that we are thinking about, I think we need to do an experiment of this integral ecology of Pope Francis and see what kind of education initiative that might be that nurtures the mindset, the spirituality, and the lifestyle of integral ecology. So that is how we started. And so as soon as we started anyway, on the land, then got into problems of land disputes. Many from post-colonial societies, Africa, will recognize this problem of land disputes, and we can spend much time talking about the question of land disputes. So we couldn't do anything on the land. The bishop, who I shared with what we wanted to do, so this was a great project. We need to make sure that we do it, a kind of a Laudato Si center. So he took us around 5 parishes, showing us different plots of land to pick a place where to do the project. After the project had stalled for a year and a half. And we landed in this place of Nandere, the first Catholic parish north of Kampala, where the diocese, the parish had over 1 square mile of land, and that is where BLI, Bethany Land Institute, is located. And so the diocese signed a lease of over 400 acres. Here we are thinking about that we had 85 acres, big deal, 400 acres of land. That is where BLI is located. But there's something significant about coming to a place like this, a lot of institutions, the parish that was established in 1890, schools, that kind of raised our antenna, my antenna, towards the significance of institutions. And I will say a little more about that. So we set out to start working. In a way, the small program that we had really becoming more and more redesigned in terms of long-term institutional grounding, working on policies, on curricula that we are not there, that kind of combine spirituality, education, economics, bringing together different experts, staff hiring policies, bank accounts. So the number of years that I'm spending back and forth in Uganda, here I am a theologian at Notre Dame, and now spending 2, 3, 4, 5 days lining up in front of a bank to open up a bank account. And many of you from a campus of education where we are training our young people in terms of the demonstration gardens that are combining not only regenerative agriculture, but a whole formation into the lifestyle and rhythm that kind of builds a sense of who am I, kind of really working out at this notion of spirituality that Pope Francis is talking about. What does it look like? What does it mean? Is it a Catholic spirituality? And for us trying to do that within the context of work and land and regenerative agriculture where everything is connected to everything else, trying to resist the kind of conventional agriculture that is heavily reliant on pesticide that eventually then poison the soil and so forth. So kind of really working on the farming, the regenerative dimension of it, the campus, inviting young people whom we call caretakers after Genesis chapter 2 verse 15, till the land, care for it, starting the school. And what the bishop did actually that was very, very significant. This is just after COVID, the seminarians are back at home, so he ordered the seminary to come to study at BLI. And the seminary didn't like it. They came kicking, screaming, because they are master's students. They are doing theology and philosophy. Now you are telling them to go work the land where the peasants are working the land. Come on. They came because they had no choice. But what is significant, after 3 months, they didn't want to go actually. Something had happened in the process of their working with the ground, with the land. Engaging the caretakers themselves into community engagement, working with the village communities, the caretakers themselves as the teachers in the community, and so it's part of their education. Now we have our second strategic year plan, working with the parish, which is 25 square miles of land, in terms to see how these integral ecology principles of regenerative agriculture can actually transform that rural setting. The other program at BLI is what is we call Martha's Market. All these names are from the biblical stories of Bethany that we may not have time to go back into. But Martha, the one who had her own house, kind of economic entrepreneurship, sense of money, household management, investment, saving, teaching these young people in the rural community that sense, and starting up a microfinance society, and now also a farmers co-op. That all have to do with the economics and exploiting the land. We have over 100 acres of land into commercial agriculture production. And then the third program is the Lazarus Forest of reforestation, of wetland management. The missionary had started a forest that has over time been depleted completely, and now conserving that, working with the wetland also, managing and conserving the wetland, and doing a tree campaign program in the rural communities with a target of 1 million trees in the next 20 or so years. So working with the communities toward this reforestation effort. You can already see the effect, and I will come back to this a little bit, the effect over these few years, 5 years that we've been here, of regeneration. The birds that have long gone away, they are back. The forest is kind of conserved. One key sign of hope really is that I even didn't know that there had been, once upon a time, a stream in the middle of the forest because it was depleted, it was dry. Now that stream has come back. And this is now the only remaining natural forest within a radius of 150 miles because of the mass deforestation that is underway. A small example about this, we don't have time to see it, but in terms of the forest, there was a story that was recently told by a news TV station about Lazarus Forest at Bethany Institute, that it was aired actually on a TV, national TV, showing the kind of the regeneration and the stream, and this was in preparation of COP29. The minister in charge of the environment saw this and said, "What is this?" Said, "This is what we need to go and show at COP29." because they were under pressure to show what have they done in terms of meeting the Paris Agreement commitments. So they came and contacted us and said, oh, we need to do this video, take away the NTV logo, and then this we are going to present at COP29 as these are the efforts of Uganda in terms of meeting the Paris commitments. The caretakers themselves, we can speak about the caretakers as another sign of hope, who are now, after 2 years of residential programs, they go back into their rural communities, establish their own farms, and they become the teachers themselves in the rural communities. Perhaps I can end by this story of Alice, is one of the caretakers who came to BLI very reluctantly, but the mother forced her to come. She was living in Kampala with an uncle in a small shop. COVID happened. She came back to the village, and the mother said, go to BLI. She said she couldn't touch the soil, so she came reluctantly. For 2 weeks, she was doing nothing. After 2 weeks, she went to the director. She wanted to go back home. The director persuaded her to stay. And then after 4 weeks, again, she wanted to go back home. The mother pleaded with her, and then she stayed. Now she's graduated and she's working in the community. So I asked her, why did you stay? And she responded like this, and I'm quote, it's because they were teaching things that were making me happy. What things? I asked. I said, well, they told us that everything is connected, that we are connected with even the butterflies and the mosquitoes and the environment. And then they gave me a plot of land, and I started making some money. And then she said something to this effect, perhaps I can save the world from here. A 19-year-old girl in Africa talking about saving the world from a place like Nandere in the rural communities. But I think that story, I think is a story really of hope. And I will say a few things about it. So she's graduated, she's gone back to community, she's working in her mother's half an acre plot of land across the road from the school, where she's doing vegetables and chickens, picking up plastics from her classmates. When they see her, they think that she's gone crazy. What young woman is doing that, touching the ground, picking up these plastics? But gradually, the school noticed, and they were sending, first of all, young kids to learn how to do vegetables in this kind of regenerative way, compost. And now she's offering some lessons to the school. And more importantly, she's also going. And she said, I never know that I could even stand in front of 5 people to speak. And now here she is speaking about what she's discovered. Stories like this, I think, give a sense of hope. But what I wanted to share, apart from the work that we are doing, is a few things that I'm learning. And in the next last minutes of my time, I want to share just briefly. Leonard gave 8 points. I want to do 7. 7 is a better number. It's a biblical number. I want to do 7 things that I'm learning about hope as work. The first one is how that hope is born of lament. The question of lament, the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor, that is connected to really the cry of the villages. That actually is what propelled this work forward. But how this lament, again, cannot be plotted along a historical trajectory of time. It's not that we have lament and then hope and live happily thereafter. The ongoing journey of lament, then the land we buy then comes into conflict, and then got new land, and now the ongoing in a way journey of lament and hope, all kind of, yeah. I can share many stories of that frustration, of our pumps being stolen and so forth, the forest encroachment. So lament as an ongoing element of hope. So that's the first lesson I'm learning. The second lesson I am learning is about the unexpected gifts that accompany this work of hope. They're always gifts. So when Isaiah promises, see, I'm doing a new thing. Can you see it? God is always planting seeds of hope in unexpected places. And I'm learning this from this work. The frustration that came out of the land dispute when we are almost ready to start on the work, 1.5 years was so frustrating. And now see how 85 acres of land turned into over 400 acres of land, uncontested land that was not expected at all. And as I look back, the number of gifts that we received along the way, not only of partners that we didn't know who would come to support the work, Franciscan sisters and other partners, the people that have come into the work, Simon, Samson, Sylvester, that are doing the work in a way. We can say that, okay, we do due diligence, but in many ways, there are gifts that happen in very unexpected ways. The third element that I want to share about hope is the very work of hope. The day-to-day dimensions of hope, of trying to do hope, especially where there is no blueprint. I wish there would be a blueprint that we could just implement this. But there is no such a thing. And so a lot of it taking lots of improvisation. I'm reminded, and we are talking with Cesar over lunch, about what Pope Francis talks about in terms of the social movements when he describes them as social poets, kind of trying to make do with whatever is available. So I see a lot of that in any journey of hope. There's a lot of that social poetry that's kind of trying to weave together in a way and bring into existence something that didn't exist before. The fourth element, lesson that I'm learning about this, has to do with the, I don't know what to call it. Is it the audacity of hope, the excellency of hope, the ambition of hope, the grandeur, like we are talking about that this program is going to transform rural societies. We want rural communities in Africa to change from being places of poverty, of hopelessness, to flourishing communities, the way that God intended Africa to be, with food, with ecological well-being, good air, soil, with income, transforming rural communities. The village in Africa, in post-colonial Africa, the village is a sign, is a metaphor for whatever is bad, primitive, negative, whatever that has to be left behind in order to come to modernity. We want to reverse that. This is huge. The transformation of rural communities. And we want to do it with these caretakers, the Alices of this world, who have never even gone to university. But there is something always scandalous, audacious, in other words, about our claim or our work in terms of hope. Recently, I don't have much time, but recently I wanted to share the experience of watching the movie of Francis Cabrini. I don't know whether some of you have seen the movie, when she's going back and forth and before the Pope, and she tells the story of Goliath, and the Pope looks at her and says, so, and how David then became king, and the Pope asks her, so you want to be king? She says, no. I want to build an empire of hope. Even being king is not enough. He says, this world cannot contain the dreams that I have for the poor. Jack Gilbert is an English poet who says something to the effect that the expectant heart is always pregnant with hopes that are the wrong size for this world. There is always something of the wrong size when we are talking about hope that doesn't fit in a way. And I have many stories from the work of BLI that we can share afterwards. The fifth lesson is the fragility of hope. At times even the futility. I think this is what Leonard was talking about. That at times you feel you are not able to help in a way. But there's something about fragility that I see. Recently, about a month and a half ago, Alice just told the story, sent me a WhatsApp message. Father Emmanuel, all my chickens have been stolen. And this is the third time that my chickens have been stolen. I'm trying to help the community, but is this the way that the community is repaying me? There's so many young people loitering around. I'm even afraid for my own life. What should I do? Again, that sense of lament, but there's always something fragile. There's no guarantee. At times maybe 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward, but there it is. The 6th lesson I'm learning from this is the smallness of hope. Transforming rural communities with Alice's, Paul, and this is too small. I've recently talked to somebody from actually one of the funding agencies. He said, this seems very good, but it's too small. We want something scalable. This environmental crisis is huge. You're doing something, but we need something scalable that is going to transform the whole world. And I feel that there's always going to be something about hope that is remain small, that is remain humbling. Perhaps I'm learning this from Wendell Berry, one of the key inspiring examples, environmental sustainability, who says something to the effect: the work of planet saving will always remain, and I quote, small, humble, and humbling. How to learn to live in this kind of smallness is itself, in a way, a key dimension of hope. And the final lesson that I'm learning about the work of hope is about the personal journey, the personal story, my own engagement, in a way, kind of answering the question, why me? Why bother? I keep thinking about what I get myself into. I'm expected to be in this faculty meeting at Notre Dame, and then I'm finding myself I'm on this Zoom call in Uganda. Then I'm solving problems of water pumps that are being stolen and things. What do I get myself? Why is this important? Why do I care about this in the way that I care about it? Could it be because I am born and raised in a village, and I find the lifestyle in the village is the status, the marginalization, that is totally scandalous, that this cannot go on. But there is something about me, as me, that is important. In other words, I matter in this story of hope. On the other hand, I don't matter. It's not about me. It's about God's dream for the world. So that kind of tension, I think, is something that I'm trying to reflect on more and more, the significance of the personal within this big drama of God's reconciliation to the world. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was quite interesting hearing about the Bethany Land Institute. Our next speaker is Liz O'Donnell Gandolfo from Wake Forest. She is the Edith and Arthur E. Early Associate Professor of Catholic and Latin American Studies and the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. A constructive theologian rooted in the Catholic tradition, her teaching and research places Christian theology in conversation with human resilience and resistance to vulnerability and violence, especially in context of social injustice and ecological degradation. She's published multiple articles, book chapters, and books. Her first book, The Power and Vulnerability of Love, A Theological Anthropology, draws on women's diverse experiences of maternity and natality to construct a theology of suffering and redemption anchored in the reality of human vulnerability. Remembering the Reign of God, the decolonial witness of El Salvador's Church of the Poor, which Dr. Gandolfo co-authored with Laurel Marshall Potter, places the decolonial praxis of the ecclesial-based communities of El Salvador in critical conversation with the continued coloniality of Roman Catholic ecclesiology and eschatology. Her most recent book, Ecomartyrdom in the Americas, Living and Dying for Our Common Home, reflects theologically on the ecological imaginations and ongoing murders of land and environmental defenders, especially in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think I can get over here. From the beginning. There we go. This is the right one, right?
I think so. Well, yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mark, for the introduction. And thank you as well to Bill Kavanaugh. I'm so grateful for this invitation to participate in this conference. Also grateful to Karen and Milton back there for all the logistical work you've done to organize such an impactful event. As someone who's kind of a Catholic in exile in a very ecumenical space in the U.S. South, this is a really special experience for me to be back in a predominantly Catholic environment, especially in the wake of the passing or loss of Pope Francis. So I'm really honored and pleased to be here with you all. My presentation today revolves around ecological martyrs and/as wellsprings of hope in the struggle for our common home. So I'd like to begin with a narrative litany of sorts. Stories and litanies of saints and martyrs are such a beautiful element of Catholic spiritual and liturgical traditions around the world. They orient us to who we are as human beings and who we are called to be. And they invoke a cloud of witnesses to surround us and inspire us to participate in incarnating the divine dream of beloved community for humanity and creation as a whole. As Pope Francis insisted in Spes non confundit, we need to treasure the testimony of the martyrs in order to confirm our hope and allow it to bear good fruit. So I'm going to share with you a series of short vignettes that highlight the witness of women and men who have paid the ultimate price of their lives for their participation in this dream through their struggle for our common home in Latin America. I learned over 2 decades ago during my time living and working in El Salvador, the land of martyrs, of San Romero and so many others, that a litany of martyrs in Latin America often includes the proclamation of presente upon calling the martyr's name. And so as I proceed through this litany, I invite you to join me in that response. So after each vignette, I will call their name and I ask you to respond presente. Father Josimo Moraes Tavares was a Brazilian priest of African descent who was assassinated on May 10th, 1986, because of his ministry of pastoral accompaniment and advocacy for the human rights of landless workers in a remote region of the Amazon rainforest. He was a poet and is remembered for his gentle demeanor, his love for dancing, playing soccer, playing guitar, wearing tattered Hawaiian flip-flops, and listening to people tell their stories. Father Josimo lives on in the communities, organizations, and programs that bear his name and carry on his legacy in their pastoral work and socio-environmental projects such as agroforestry, medicinal herb gardens, bioconstruction, Creole seed houses, and diversification of food and energy production. Father Josimo Tavares, presente. Chico Mendes was a Brazilian rubber tapper, union organizer, and environmental activist who was assassinated on December 22nd, 1988, for his work fighting alongside his fellow rubber tappers and in solidarity with indigenous peoples against deforestation, ecological degradation, and social devastation wrought by the incursion of highways, ranches, and loggers in the Amazon rainforest. Chico lives on in the international environmental movement, in the struggle for climate justice, and in the bird that has been named for him, Chico's tyrannulet. As the popular Mexican rock group Maná puts it, he lives on in the rain that falls on the forest, in the tears of the angels who cry for all those whose lives have been stolen. Chico Mendez. Presente. Father Alcides Jimenez Chicangana was a Colombian Catholic priest who was killed while celebrating the Eucharist on September 11th, 1998, for his pastoral commitments to peace building, resisting fossil fuel extractivism, and promoting food sovereignty, which was threatened in the Putumayo region of Colombia by monocrop agriculture, particularly intensive cultivation of coca. He is remembered as a pastor who planted seeds of justice and ecological well-being in the lives of the people in his parish in Puerto Caicedo. Father Alcides lives on in the continued work of his people, in their community development projects, in the seeds that he planted amongst them, and in the earth. Father Alcides Jimenez, presente. Sister Dorothy Stang was a white Catholic woman from Ohio who was assassinated on February 12, 2005, after nearly 40 years in Brazil as a missionary engaged in pastoral ministry with ecclesial-based communities. With these communities, she worked for the promotion of sustainable agriculture and defense of human rights, especially land rights of small farmers who were being driven off their land in the Brazilian Amazon by loggers and ranchers. Sister Dorothy lives on in the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur and in the ecclesial-based communities of Anapu, where her loss is mourned deeply, but her presence is felt daily in the local women's group that calls themselves Dorothy's Seeds. In the trees that the people of Anapu have planted to restore areas of the forest that have been destroyed, and in the newly documented Amazonian screech owl that bears her name, Dorothy Stang, presente. Marcelo Rivera was a community organizer and water protector in the department of Cabañas, El Salvador, who was tortured and murdered in June 2009 for his leadership of a concerted campaign to defend the communities and watersheds of El Salvador from gold mining, which is almost always accompanied by dire ecological and public health consequences. Marcelo lives on in his community's continued struggle for environmental justice and in the struggle of contemporary water protectors to reinstate the historic law banning all metallic mining throughout the country, which had been passed, thanks to the efforts of Marcelo and his companions, by the Salvadoran legislature in 2017, but was repealed just this past December. Marcelo Rivera, presente. Berta Isabel Cáceres was an indigenous leader in Honduras who was assassinated on March 2nd, 2016 for organizing amongst her Lencan people to protect the sacred waters of the Gualcarque River and the surrounding communities from social and ecological devastation by the internationally financed Aguasarca hydroelectric dam project. Berta lives on in the work of the National Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras, COPIN, which she co-founded and directed, in her daughters who continue her struggle, and in her prophetic words shared across the world on YouTube, videos, posters, murals, t-shirts, and more. I share with you now a few of these words from the acceptance speech that Berta gave when she won the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2015. In our cosmovisions, we are beings who have emerged from the earth, from water, and from corn. The Lenca people are ancestral custodians of rivers, which are further protected by the spirits of young girls who teach us that to give our lives in multiple ways for the defense of the rivers is to give our lives for the good of humanity and this planet. Wake up. Wake up, humanity. We are out of time. We must shake ourselves free of the rapacious capitalism, racism, and patriarchy that will only assure our self-destruction. The Gualcarque River has called upon us, as have all the rivers that are seriously threatened in our world. We must answer the call. Our Mother Earth, militarized, fenced in, poisoned, where basic rights are systematically violated, demands that we take action. Let us build then societies that are capable of coexisting in a way that is just, dignified, life-giving. Let us come together and move forward with hope as we defend and care for the blood of the earth and of its spirits. Berta concluded her speech by dedicating the award to all the rebels out there, to her mother, to the Lenca people, to Rio Blanco, to Copin, and to the martyrs who have died defending the goods of this natural world. Berta Cáceres? Presente. The martyrs to whom Berta dedicated her award are not few in number. The stories of Josimo, Chico, Alcides, Dorothy, Marcelo, and Berta that I just referenced in this litany were not isolated cases, even in their own local contexts. They're just the ones who have garnered the most international attention. Since the turn of the 21st century alone, though, thousands of environmental activists around the world have been assassinated for their work to protect the earth and its inhabitants from exploitation and destruction by profit-driven, extractivist industries. The activism and legacy of slain environmental defenders is intimately tied to local lands and peoples, but the ecological and social movements to which they belong form international networks of activism and advocacy that are on the front lines of the global struggle against ecological destruction and climate breakdown. While no region of the globe has been entirely exempt from the phenomenon of these environmental killings, activists in the global south are by far at greatest risk, and certain regions of Latin America in particular have seen the lion's share of murders. Indigenous people are especially vulnerable. Last year, on September 14th, another environmental defender was assassinated in the department of Colón in Honduras. You may have learned about him from Jesse's poster yesterday. Juan Antonio Lopez was a delegate of the Word, a coordinator of social pastoral care in the Diocese of Trujillo, and founding member of the Integral Ecology Pastoral Care Initiative in Honduras. He worked with the Municipal Committee for the Defense of Common and Public Goods in his town of Tocoa to defend waters that flow through the Guapinol and San Pedro rivers, both of which, like Berta's Hualcarque, are also sacred and vital to the livelihood and spirituality of the Lenca people. This work brought Juan into conflict with power brokers whose profits from open pit iron oxide mining, were worth more than the lives of human beings, of other creatures, and of the lands and waterways on which local communities and ecosystems depend for health and sustenance. After Juan's death, Pope Francis grieved his murder, remembering him after the Sunday Angelus on September 22nd. And his local bishop addressed a letter to him, noting that his defense of our common home was motivated by his faith commitments, saying of Juan, "You told me that you were not an environmentalist, because for you, the social, ecological, and political commitment was not an ideological question, but a question of your being of Christ and of the church." After Juan's assassination, the Latin American Bishops' Conference, together with the Platform for Peace, Democracy, and Human Rights, and the Latin American Protection Community, launched the campaign that Jesse's poster was highlighting, called Life is Hanging On by a Thread, with the campaign slogan, Weaving the Future, Protecting Life. Juan lives on in this work, the goal of which is to take action to promote the protection, solidarity, and recognition of the work of human rights and environmental defenders and social and civic leaders like Juan. Juan Antonio Lopez, presente. In what remains of my time, I'll propose that these women and men both drew on deep wellsprings of hope that empowered and nourished their work in defense of their communities and the earth. And they themselves now form part of the wellspring of hope that Catholics call the communion of saints. First, though, we must consider the nature of what they were up against. The witness of these land and environmental defenders, these ecological martyrs, reveals the logic and deadly consequences of an extractivist paradigm that embodies a way of being human designed to protect the privileged and powerful from the vulnerability of existence in a precarious universe. In contradistinction to integral ecology, which we'll discuss at greater length in a moment, let's call this model extractivist ecology. In an extractivist ecology, human vulnerability is met in fear, with several conceptual and practical moves that actually end up exacerbating vulnerability, first for marginalized and oppressed human populations and the ecosystems on which they depend, but ultimately for all of humanity and the planet as a whole. So first, extractivist ecology is characterized by a fearful mindset of scarcity that drives those with power to dominate, control, and possess the human and more than human world in order to stave off real and or perceived threats to survival and well-being, and ultimately to wealth, status, and or power. Ironically, despite the mindset of scarcity that sets this dynamic into motion, extractivism assumes that there are no limits to human plunder of the earth, that its resources are ours for the taking, for the sake of our comfort and convenience, with no end in sight. Furthermore, extractivist ecology justifies domination, control, and possession through the construction of hierarchies, more precisely hierarchical dualisms, binaries that divorce or extract, take human beings out of, extract us from our bodies, and from the more than human world from which we emerge and on which our bodies depend for sustenance. These binaries place persons and values perceived to merit invulnerability in positions of dominance over and against persons and values to be perceived to embody the carnal vulnerability of corruptible flesh. I don't have time to go into this here, but ecofeminist and eco-womanist scholars have made it abundantly clear that the Western Christian tradition has been especially complicit in this aspect of extractivist ecology. And I think that denial of coevalness can be brought into conversation with this and that Western Christian complicity in that as well. Finally, persons and communities operating out of an extractivist ecology employ covert and overt forms of violence to maintain and advance the development of the extractivist model. Violence is already inherent to extractivist ecology in the first instance of possession and control, as well as in the second instance of justification for such possession and control. But ultimately, violence is required to squash the hope that fuels both rightful protest of those who are harmed by extractivism and the pursuit of another possible world that operates out of an alternative paradigm for human coexistence in our common home. From start to finish, violence is at the heart of the extractivist response to human vulnerability. In the face of all this, land and environmental defenders, water protectors, and peace builders somehow maintain hope and find the courage necessary to resist such death-dealing forces, even as their resistance heightens their own personal vulnerability and exposure to harm. They reveal to us, thankfully, that fearful violence of extractivism is not the only way to respond to vulnerability in our relationships with one another and with our common home. The conditions of embodiment, interdependence, and temporality that necessitate our original vulnerability as human creatures, that expose us to harm, these same dimensions of human existence are also the conditions for the possibility of life itself, and a human life well lived in relationships of reciprocity with one another, with the rest of creation, and with the divine presence that abides within and in the midst of us all. Rather than responding to vulnerability guided by anxious grasping for self-protection, it is possible to respond in hope, with a courageous and compassionate imagination out of which we might live into our embodiment, interdependence, and finitude in solidarity with one another and the earth, rather than in relationships of hierarchy and domination. This is precisely how communities and movements of environmental defenders are coming together and embodying an alternative way of being human, protesting extractivism's unjust violation of humanity and the larger creation, sharing the burdens of vulnerability with one another, shouldering them together, and thereby sharing in the resilience, beauty, joy, and abundance of a fully human existence. I hesitate to characterize this way or these ways, plural, of being human under one model or paradigm because I know that there are many, many ways to respond to suffering and to imagine, conceptualize, and experience human flourishing. In fact, environmental defenders drink from many wellsprings of hope and are inspired, motivated, and guided by a wide diversity of religious, spiritual, philosophical, cultural, and ecological traditions. In the Americas, these include, but are not even limited to, indigenous cosmovisions and practices of reciprocity with the more than human world, African heritage religions that honor the life forces or energies that manifest in the sacred powers of the natural world, and Catholic traditions of Catholic social teaching, liberation theology, the preferential option for the poor, as well as creation spirituality and even new cosmology. I don't want to reduce any of these traditions to a common denominator or erase their beautiful differences. And if we had more time, which we don't have any time, right, Leonard? We could get into each of them individually and still not even scratch the surface, since each of them contains multitudes within themselves. But I'll venture out there on a limb to say that Pope Francis's paradigm of integral ecology offers a capacious and flexible enough framework that seems to get at some of the key characteristics of many of these wellsprings and the diverse ways in which environmental defenders are conceptualizing and embodying alternative ways of being human in relation to the vulnerability and beauty of life in this world. Pope Francis roots his own integral ecology in the Christian doctrine of creation. But integral ecology as a whole and each of these dimensions of it could be elaborated, extended, corrected, and embodied in conversation with other religious, spiritual, philosophical, and even scientific communities as well. Broadly speaking, integral ecology describes a way of being human that recognizes and lives into the interdependence of all things and the interconnectedness between social, political, economic, spiritual, cultural, and ecological well-being. In contradistinction to extractivist ecology, integral ecology responds to the vulnerability of human existence, not in fear, but in hope and with courage, peace, and compassion. I'll try to go quickly and taking a closer look. First, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that sees the world in terms of sacred abundance rather than scarcity, and seeks to share and communally care for the earth's abundance for the sake of meeting both human needs and the needs of creation. I love what, Dylan, you said last night about the heresy being that there's not enough to go around, right? That's what integral ecology is combating. This affirmation of gracious abundance does not deny human vulnerability or the vulnerability and finitude of creation, but rather recognizes that the gracious gift of creation must be tilled and kept carefully, gratefully, and communally in order to distribute the goods of this gift justly and maintain it for generations to come. Environmental defenders both resist the ways in which extractivism violates the earth's abundance and create alternative communities of solidarity with one another and creation, seeking ways of honoring and caring for the interdependence of human and ecological needs. Furthermore, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that sees all things as interconnected and refuses to fearfully extract or divide one element or dimension of existence from the others. And finally, integral ecology is a paradigm for being human that eschews violence and seeks creative and non-violent paths of resistance and alternative living. While armed self-defense is sometimes necessary and entirely justified, a worldview that sees all life as sacred and interconnected is fundamentally invested in the preservation of life and the promotion of peaceful coexistence. Most environmental defenders have seen enough violence in their context to know, both strategically and spiritually, that violent conflict ends up harming the earth and vulnerable communities more than anybody else. Furthermore, environmental defenders know firsthand the power of creative forms of resistance that reimagine and re-embody the world both in those small, everyday ways that Emmanuel was talking about and in the larger struggles for social and environmental justice. In the words of Berta Cáceres again, you have the bullet, I have the word. The bullet dies when it explodes. the word lives on when it is replicated. The bullet and the bulldozer both of them seek invulnerability for some human beings at the expense of exacerbated vulnerability for others. And yet eventually, the violence of bullets and bulldozers ensures self-destruction for us all. Environmental defenders know this and seek another way. Unfortunately, the stories of Josimo, Chico, Alcides, Dorothy, Marcelo, Berta, and Juan Antonio, along with so many other thousands of slain environmental defenders around the world, demonstrate that resisting and embodying alternatives to extractivist ecology is dangerous business. The violence of extractivism is especially harsh for those who dare to fight back. These individuals and the communities that they represent are forced into unjustly vulnerable positions that no one should have to endure. And yet they persist in hope, in their resistance to extractivism and embodiment of alternatives, even in the face of death. They witness to another way of being human in the world, the way of integral ecology, of shared abundance and care, interconnection and creative resistance. The communities that carry on their legacies remember them with great love, and while grief and rage abounds at their loss, joy and gratitude for their witness abounds all the more. Indeed, resurrection hope abounds all the more. The artwork depicted here, along with music and dance, celebration, and continued resistance, carrying on their legacy, all point to the resurrected presence of Ecomartyrs in the great cloud of witnesses that Catholics name as the communion of saints. This presence serves as a wellspring of hope amongst their own people and beyond, in all those who persevere in the struggle for our common home, and in our common home itself, in the lands and waterways, trees, and more than human creatures from whose womb we have all been born. Episcopal priest and civil rights activist Polly Murray once wrote that hope is a song in a weary throat. So many songs and poems of lament and hope have been written about eco-martyrs like Josimo, Chico, Alcides, Dorothy, Marcelo, and Berta. One particular song by Honduran singer-songwriter Carla Lara bears powerful witness to the martyrs and other ancestral spirits as wellsprings, or in this case, rivers of hope and strength for the struggle. It's called Que corra el río, let the river run. She says, let the river run, let it run, Paula in its path and Tomas in the stream of its waters. Let the Rio Hualcarque run, Tomas in its current and Paula in the joy with which it bathes us. One asks oneself, where does so much strength come from? Where do so many Bertas come from? They told me a secret. They're ancient spirits. They're ancestral spirits who give strength to the body, who give strength to the Lenca. The witness of these ecological martyrs, of their communities, and of the rivers and lands and ecosystems that they died defending should challenge all of us, in the words of Pope Francis, to break with the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness, and live into a hope-filled logic of life, compassion, and solidarity with one another and the rest of creation. Que corra el río, let the river run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. So we'll switch to our final speaker right now and then do Q&A. Debra Dean Murphy from West Virginia Wesleyan College. She is the professor of religious studies and co-director of the Center for Restorative Justice at West Virginia Wesleyan College. She's the author of Teaching That Transforms, Worship as the Heart of Christian Education, 2007, Happiness, Health, and Beauty, The Christian Life in Everyday Terms, 2015, and numerous essays, articles, and book reviews. She's the co-convener of the Society of Christian Ethics Liturgy and Ethics Interest Group, as well as the co-editor of the Theopolitical Vision series published by Whitman Stock. Debra is also the coordinator of the Ecclesia Project, a network of Christians and Christian communities across the denominational spectrum committed to their own conversions and to unlearning the habits of empire. She's a member of the Catholic Committee of Appalachia and All Saints Catholic Church in Bridgeport, West Virginia. Her latest book, Grieving the End of the World, Climate Collapse and Other Breakdowns, is forthcoming from Cascade. Please welcome Debra.
It is good to be here. I'm grateful for the invitation. It's been very good to be in your company. I'm going to be speaking from the context of Appalachia, and it occurs to me, I don't want to presume, but it occurs to me that it might be good to take a beat and just talk about where that is for a moment before I begin my presentation. Appalachia broadly encompasses 13 states in the eastern United States, from northern Alabama to upstate New York. Most of the time when people refer to Appalachia, they really mean central Appalachia, and they mean it geographically and culturally. And central Appalachia spans parts of eastern Kentucky, southeastern Virginia, western North Carolina, East Tennessee, and the entirety of West Virginia. I think, as will be evident from my presentation, often Appalachia is considered not quite of America. We're sometimes thought of as a foreign country, if no one says it that baldly and boldly. I suppose in some ways that's funny, not funny. But it does actually make me at home at an international conference with intercultural theology at its heart. So again, I'm grateful to be here. All grief is local. We grieve what we have loved and lost, or what we will soon lose. And this is an intimate experience, even if shared, born of proximity and deep familiarity. If grief, as philosopher Nicholas Wolderstorff has said, is wanting the death or destruction of a loved one to be undone, while at the same time knowing it cannot be undone, then grief is fundamentally a radical reorientation of one's being to time, memory, and the stories and relationships that constitute our lives. Of course, we can grieve well, poorly, or not at all. To deny grief, to refuse to be undone by profound loss, is to renounce something fundamental about our creatureliness, that we are made for belonging. Often the denial or defiance or deferral of grief is rationalized as altruistic. How can I give in to grief when those in my care need my constant attention? Or denial is perceived as necessary for self-preservation. If I allow myself to grieve, how will I function? Or grief is romanticized as a kind of solitary piety. As musician and writer Nick Cave observes, there is something that feels almost heroic about suffering on your own, to be locked into a world of memory. It's almost a nobility. This, though, is but another form of denial. Good grief, by contrast, becomes possible when we acknowledge that death and other kinds of profound loss affect us in ways that cannot always be foreseen, forestalled, or neatly governed. Something takes hold of you, writes political philosopher Judith Butler. Where does it come from? What sense does it make? What claims us at such moments, such that we are not the masters of ourselves? To feel the force of these questions can be a dizzying experience, physically and metaphorically. But yielding to the disorientation of grief may also open us to moments of stark insight, bringing perception to a standstill in ways that can feel absurd in the still spinning world of unanswered email and parking tickets and getting dinner on the table. These lines from philosopher and poet Jan Zwicky speak to something familiar to those who have been felled in such ways by grief. The grief stood in me like a knife, and in that instant, like a fairy tale, the floor, your hand, shoes, clothes, the light, the door frame, shed their surfaces. I saw things as they are. Such flashes of lucidity and absolute presence usually arrive fleetingly and at inopportune times, yet this makes them no less important for what they work in us, as they signal the possibility of more lasting changes in our perception of ourselves, others, our losses, and the world itself. What grief also makes evident, Butler observes, is the thrall in which our relations with others hold us, in ways that we cannot always recount or explain, and in ways that challenge the very notion of ourselves as autonomous and in control. In the powerlessness of grief is the recognition that relationality is all there is. This is not only the realization that the self is constituted through kinship, within a web of mutuality with the loved one who has died or the place or community we have lost. It is that when such catastrophes occur, we ourselves have gone missing. The lines in Zwicky's poem that immediately follow the ones I just cited corroborate this. But still, I could not see myself. We may experience this invisibility of self, this nowhere-ness of grief, for longer than the guidebooks or the grief counselors suggest is prudent. But grief takes the time it takes. And in our taking time for grief, we may find ourselves undergoing the slow process by which we develop a point of identification with suffering itself. This is ground on which we can find our footing again, where we sense our shared vulnerability with all living beings and how it is that we are at stake in one another. Experience of displacement, the ground shifting beneath our feet as we give way to grief, entering new terrain from which to perceive our shared frailties and finitude. These are ways that geography can be a useful metaphor for considering how grief locates, dislocates, and relocates us again as we undergo profound loss. But the connection between geography and grief is also more basic and literal. How it is that the losses in and of the places we love can elicit profound sorrow, and how the character of our grieving is necessarily localized, yet also not unlike the grief of others who mourn their own losses. It's helpful to note, I think, that place is also a conceptual category for reflecting on any geographical region and how it's always culturally rooted and politically contested as an idea, one that is constructed from social relations which are dynamic, shifting, and always power-laden. One significant implication of place as social construction is that it helps illuminate something obvious and undeniable. Some places convey prestige, desirability, and indispensability, while others are counted as expendable, disposable, inconsequential, what Naomi Klein and others have called sacrifice zones. Klein notes that for a very long time, sacrifice zones all shared a few elements in common. They were poor places, out-of-the-way places, places where residents lacked political power. But such physical sites, of course, are not hermetically sealed. The grievous harm that happens in the Canadian tar sands and the coal fields of Kentucky does not stay neatly contained in these places. It has always been a convenient fiction to believe that coal, oil, and gas companies and their moneyed colluders can easily quarantine the collateral damage of their filthy habit. One of the latest forms of extraction, hydraulic fracturing or fracking, currently has operations in more than 30 states in the US. As Klein puts it, the game is up, and we are all in the sacrifice zone now. Still, we all live somewhere, and we grieve losses in our particular somewheres. And so I invite you to consider with me the geography of grief and the hope born of grief in the place where I live, a place like all places, constructed and governed by social relations that are dynamic, shifting, and always power-laden. To inhabit the particular sacrifice zone of central Appalachia, and more specifically for me, West Virginia, is to have long understood that we are, among many things, simultaneously invisible. Do you live near Richmond? And widely ridiculed. This means that we are accustomed to having our dignity assailed, often in the most casual, breezy ways, jabs and one-liners almost always delivered as if the speaker believes it is the first time an Appalachian has ever heard the joke. More consequentially, the dehumanization of persons in Appalachia happens through the dirty work, in every sense, of fossil fuel extraction and its accompanying social calamities, by which vast numbers of inhabitants of this region do not have access to safe, clean drinking water and to healthful living conditions more generally. This has been the situation for generations, and it continues still, as prized materials deep within the earth are taken out and taken elsewhere, along with the colossal profits that their extraction generates. Coal miners whose lungs have been poisoned and backs broken have been deserted by the corporations who have ever only regarded them as expendable labor. Their need for relief from excruciating pain helped to usher in another project of mammoth exploitation from another group of greedy colonizers, the global pharmaceutical industry and the opioid crisis, a term which can lead one to miss how orchestrated the massive free flow of painkillers into this region was. The entanglement of these two profiteering, death-dealing schemes, extractive industries and legally sanctioned drug cartels, brings to vivid reality Ruth Wilson Gilmore's claim that systematic abandonment depends on the agile durability of organized violence. For all that is worthy of grief and rage in our past, present, and future, this place and its people, I suggest, have been made ungrievable. For decades, Appalachia has been constructed as an idea in which the inviolability and grievability of land, water, people, and all other creatures have been called into question. In frames of war, when is life grievable? Judith Butler makes deft use of the concept of framing to reflect critically on how Western audiences perceive and process the human costs of war. Entities engaged in war making and the messaging operations at their disposal have always collaborated on strategies of containment in order to control the visual and narrative dimensions of war. This is how assent to war is cultivated and maintained. As Butler argues, the frames of war, selective ways of carving up experience, do not merely exhibit the material reality of a given conflict. They are essential to the perpetually crafted animus of that material reality, and thus critical to the conduct of war itself. Such frames function as tacit interpretive schemes that divide worthy from unworthy lives, differentiating the cries we can hear from those we cannot, the sights we can see from those we cannot. Frames of war do this work affectively, impacting audiences emotionally, viscerally, immediately, and disposing them by turns to shock or numb indifference. War sustains its practices, Butler argues, through acting on the senses, crafting them to apprehend the world selectively, deadening affect in response to certain images and sounds, and enlivening affective responses to others. Frames of war, then, are always politically saturated and are themselves operations of power. They also raise a more fundamental question: what is life? Lives are, by definition, precarious. They can be expunged at will or by accident. Their persistence is in no sense guaranteed. While all life is characterized by precariousness, not all lives are equally precarious. And so Butler uses, a bit confusingly, I think sometimes, the word precarity to name the many ways in which some lives experience a heightened precariousness that has everything to do with the determinations of worth codified in social policies and economic practices. Butler writes, precarity designates that politically induced condition in which certain populations suffer from failing social and economic networks of support and become differentially exposed to injury, violence, and death. If a life is not counted as a life, if the ontological status of a person or population is compromised or suspended, what frames of war seek to accomplish, then that life is ungrievable. Poverty is the predominant frame through which Appalachia historically has been viewed. From at least the early 1960s, with the Kennedy and Johnson administration's war on poverty, to the presidential elections of the last decade and the pundit class's presumption that Appalachia de facto is Trump country, this economically, culturally, and racially diverse region has been framed as ground zero for America's disaffected white rural poor. The journalists and photographers who have made their way here over the decades have arrived with various agendas to document astonishing economic hardship that very much exists here, to showcase religious-like devotion to an egomaniacal politician, plenty of these folks around, and offer cautionary tales about how drug abuse destroys lives. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But what is captured in the poverty frame, whether the particular subject matter concerns poor people, conservative voters, or someone addicted to OxyContin, it's almost always reductionist and cartoonish. Because Appalachia is also famously associated with a stable of long-standing literary and visual tropes like backwardness and bare feet, the region is easy pickings for this kind of poverty porn. Narratives and images of squalor created for the purpose of immediate emotional arousal in the insatiable onlooker. Like sexual porn, a sense of domination or superiority in the viewer voyeur is also often elicited. Whether for entertainment or in service of serious journalism, Appalachia is routinely portrayed with a kind of sentimental contempt. And what is contemptible, even if it is pitied, can never be grievable, as people and place collapse within the frame and in the imagination of the appalled, self-satisfied outsider. Because the poverty frame with these built-in tendencies toward the pornographic and sentimental presents its subjects under conditions in which their loss would not matter, the value of their lives is not perceivable. What the poverty frame eclipses, then, is not just the presence in this place of people with plenty of money, political progressives, and persons who have never abused opioids, truths that are not particularly interesting anyway. Rather, what is hidden from view is a whole ecology of policies related to labor, land, a broken healthcare system, mass incarceration, corruption in government and industry, and more. These are obstacles and injustices faced by persons and communities everywhere, not just in Appalachia. And like persons and communities everywhere, we exist within systems and structures of slow violence, what Rob Nixon defines as a violence that occurs gradually and out of sight, a violence of delayed destruction that is dispersed across time and space, and attritional violence that is typically not viewed as violence at all. Interviewing Biden and Harris despisers in a diner in a dying coal town is tiresome and predictable and exploitive, and the 3 minutes of formulaic footage that makes the news cannot convey the steady accumulation and endurance of numerous forms of organized violence in the lives of these persons and the places they are from. Conversely, neither does the poverty frame make visible joy or tenderness or curiosity, qualities that would dispel the idea that Appalachians are not as ordinary, complicated, boring, flawed, and winsome as people everywhere. Frames of poverty, like frames of war, function as interpretive schemes that divide worthy from unworthy lives, establishing what is permitted to count as reality. One of the most persistent fictions posing as reality in this way of looking at Appalachia is the belief that being poor is fundamentally a personal choice. This belief is best accounted for perhaps through the hillbilly elegy effect, the embrace of a tidy, sanctimonious narrative which views poverty first and foremost as moral failure. J.D. Vance's extraordinarily popular book argued this position all the way to a lucrative Hollywood movie deal, a seat in the U.S. Senate, and the vice presidency of the United States. For him, growing up in Kentucky and Ohio, the Rust Belt technically, so not a hillbilly, in conditions of family dysfunction, food insecurity, and generational violence and addiction, the obstacles to flourishing were not for him the corrupt systems that conspire to keep these conditions in place. Rather, the obstacles are the personal character traits of laziness and lack of ambition. One should do what young Vance himself did, he moralizes. Apply yourself and get the hell out. To Yale, if you're as savvy and driven as he is. In the poverty frame, where land and water and entire ecosystems have been abused to death, where local economies are wrecked and communities have been gutted, where residents themselves are sick to death in every sense, outside observers, incredulous from their own places of comfort and safety, often yell into their newspapers and screens something like, "Why don't you people just leave?" Never mind the impossibility of selling your house under these dire ecological and economic conditions, a house in which you may have grown up, not just a dwelling, but a true home place. And forget the medical bills from suffering dizziness, headaches, tremors, anxiety, confusion, nerve damage, and muscle fatigue due to sustained exposure to volatile organic compounds like benzene, xylene, and hexane, which have left you under mountains of debt. Our home is no longer a home. It is a place of sickness, confusion, and sadness, wrote Abby Tennant in the summer of 2022, as she described her family's long ordeal of living next to a fracking compressor station and what the daily exposure to known carcinogens did to her young daughter, Piper. The invisibility of families like the Tennants and the presumed inevitability of their circumstances pressed the question of which ruined places and whose ruined lives are worthy of grief. The Catholic Committee of Appalachia was formed more than 50 years ago with a mission to serve Appalachia, her poor, and the entire web of creation. The original members were committed to Catholic social teaching broadly and to Vatican II's vision of the Church as the entire people of God. The liberation theology birthed at Medellin and the 1971 Synod of Bishops, as well as Asian liberationist movements in more recent years, have grounded the CCA's efforts to heed the voices of Appalachians who, like the dispossessed in other parts of the world, constitute the magisterium of the poor. 3 Appalachian pastorals have been produced by the CCA. Prophetic letters published in 1975, 1995, and 2015, addressed to clergy, laity, and all people of goodwill. The first 2 letters were written collaboratively and endorsed by the bishops of the region. The third letter, The Telling Takes Us Home, designated a people's pastoral, since by 2015 there were no bishops in the 25 dioceses of Appalachia willing to be associated with it. All 3 letters reflect the CCA's commitment to speak a prophetic word on behalf of a struggling human and wider earth community. For the third pastoral letter, the preparers arranged face-to-face meetings with persons from underrepresented communities to ask them a single question: what is it like to be you in this place? The responses and stories generated by the question came from coal miners, the housing insecure, the young, people of color, Native persons, Latinx persons, LGBTQ persons, sex workers, members of diverse religious communities, people who have left the Catholic Church, and people who have left the region. The range of experiences spoken to exposed the reductive narratives about Appalachians so often offered up for public consumption. Conversations with persons of color, for instance, revealed how the presumed whiteness of Appalachia has long obscured the region's racial diversity, silencing the stories of persons in non-majority communities. The Telling Takes Us Home also gives a voice to Earth's anguish. The legacy of mountaintop removal is perhaps the most shocking example of the violence done to the land and its inhabitants. The force of the explosives used in this kind of mining can crack the foundations of houses and drinking wells near and far. It causes mudslides and catastrophic flooding. It produces fly rock, fragmented stone ranging from fine dust to petals to boulders, which has been deadly to ecosystems and people. The processes in mountaintop removal destroy topsoil a century in the making. Since the inception of mountaintop removal in the 1970s, the population of cerulean warblers has decreased by more than 70%, and an entire order of mayfly has disappeared from streams below valley fills. The monstrous scars left by the massive thunderous blasts resemble desolate moonscapes, dead zones on our planet which cannot be restored to their prior life-giving condition in our lifetimes. Many people who see these wounds up close lament, "This is what the end of the world looks like to me." So where is hope to be found in the midst of so much devastation and grief? As poet Katie Ferris asks, why write poetry in a burning world? So we can train ourselves, she says, to offer poems of love to a burning world. In this sense, hope is a discipline, a practice, something we do rather than have. It isn't to be confused with triumph, nor certainly with a banal positivity. Hope, as Czech dissident Václav Havel insisted, is an orientation of the spirit that transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Genuine hope, of course, is radical, a practice of attending to the roots of things. It is revolution from the ground up. For Christians, hope takes cruciform shape. On the fringe of society, the word became history, contingency, solidarity, and weakness. As the full force of the state apparatus was brought to bear on the word made flesh, Jesus offered to the Father the suffering and abandonment of all humankind. The cross is the transformation of trauma for the healing of all creation. It is resistance to and repudiation of the death-dealing ways of empire and the slow violence afflicted on the vulnerable everywhere. The cross is what love in the ruins looks like, what hope amid terror looks like, an eschatological hope anchored beyond the horizons of empire, but rooted fully in its wreckage. At every Eucharist, we not only recall Jesus' betrayal, torture, and death, we are also, as Timothy Radcliffe puts it, contemporary with the drama. Our story is inside this story. Betrayal, torture, and death in our time, in our place, meet their undoing in the feast of reconciliation and resurrection. Our open palms receive the body of Christ, a gesture of radical hope if ever there was one, in the certainty that this act makes sense, regardless of how things turn out. Eucharist by Eucharist, we are habituated to the truth that in our powerlessness, relationality is all there is, for we are constituted through kinship within a web of mutuality. Cross and resurrection have made another world possible, and the Eucharist is its realization. As Pope Francis taught us, in the Eucharist, fullness is already achieved. It is the living center of the universe, the overflowing core of love and of inexhaustible life. The Catholic Committee of Appalachia, some 50 years on, continues to seek ways to practice radical hope in solidarity with friends at the so-called disposable peripheries. In its commitment to synodality, in gathering for conviviality and conversation, in continuing to be a listening presence in forgotten places, the CCA seeks to bear witness to the fullness already achieved, even as the full force of the state apparatus, especially in the last 100 days, is being brought to bear anew against our people and our place. To sense each creature singing the hymn of its existence is to live joyfully in God's love and hope. This is radical eschatological hope. To live into this hope is the work, including the grief work, we have been given to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Debra. So I think now we're going to invite our panelists up here to the center. We're just a little switching here. So I'd like to invite questions from the audience, and we'll also, of course, if anyone's on online, ready to ask anything, you can always maybe just. Oh, great. Oh, please.
Yeah, thank you to three presenters. I really loved your presentations. I have a question for my director, Professor Emmanuel Katongole. Thank you for defining hope as work. I am so grateful for that. I wanted to ask you that, but you covered that. Having listened to Mwila's presentation from Zambia and Caesar's presentation from Brazil, they did capture very well the situations in those countries, including climatic crisis, poverty, conflicts, wars, and things of that kind. And then coming to the United States, we have this land of the free and home of the brave, a land of opportunities where every person longs to be. And they are currently unwelcome guests. They pose a problem, like he said. So hope is work. What is it that the people in the land of the free and home of the brave are doing that people in Zambia, Africa, Brazil, and other continents who want to come to this land of opportunities are not doing? In other words, what should Africans, Brazilians, Latin Americans do to become also lands of opportunities?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sister Queen, for the comment and the question. Yeah, what should the people in Africa be doing so that their countries, or Brazil, Latin America, be doing so that their countries also become the land of the free and of the brave? But Debra's presentation begins to raise questions about the land of the free and the brave, because Appalachia is part of that land of the free and the brave. Or perhaps it is the sense that, no, places like Appalachia, they don't really belong to America. Again, to maintain a kind of a myth that America is this land flowing with the honey and milk, the land of the free and the brave. And if you find places like Appalachia, they are an abomination. They should be actually expunged from America. I think the kind of work that is pointed to by her analysis is kind of to point to the work that is required for whoever is living in this land of the free and the brave to name the grief, or the work of grief, to name the pain, the lament, the lack of hospitality. If we have to live in hope within this so-called land of the free and the brave, our first task and our ongoing task is at the same time a work of grief and lament and naming the lies that kind of keep us blinded and almost keep us forgetting the task at hand, which is the work of grief and naming the lies. So I just liked what Debra did. I just liked what you did, Liz, in terms of kind of presenting us the question of the martyrs. And I'm sure even within this so-called land of the brave, there are names that should be added to that list and for us to call presente. And I think that is the work of lament. That's the work of hope at the same time. That is the work, not just for us in Brazil and Zambia and Uganda and Appalachia, but I think it's the work that all of us need to be doing because we live in places of grief and lament. I don't know.
I'd like to add a little something, if that's okay. And it's that I think it's a myth that this is, I mean, what Emmanuel just said, I think, in other words, perhaps, that it's a myth that this has ever been the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's a nation state that was founded on land theft, genocide, ecocide, and settler colonialism. And so many of the social and ecological wicked problems that are being faced in other parts of the world have stemmed from U.S. foreign policy and economic policy, and the work of transnational corporations and the demand of consumers from especially places like the U.S., the global north in general, for the kinds of products that devastate and energy sources that devastate places like Zambia or Brazil or Appalachia. And so I think the question, kind of turning it around, is what does this land and the people of this country need to do to reverse that course, to lament, to tell the truth, and to repair and make reparation for that. So that's just what I would add.
I would just add, I mean, I agree entirely, but I also kind of want to honor the question, because in a way I think those of us from the United States who are deeply suspicious of our origins, of the ways of empire, critical, kind of want to dissociate from it, we're doing that from a place of privilege. And so I think people who are asking the question, what from other contexts and locations, which would include Appalachia and other places that are represented here, I think behind the question is also, we want the kind of safety you have. We want the kind of access to goods that you have, and that's an honorable question. And so I feel the tension and the paradox of it, of on one level wanting to deny the premise that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, but also honor the position that that questioners come from, where they ask that poignant question, we just want to flourish.
Thank you all three so much for such an effective and affective presentation. So my question is for Dr. Gandolfo, but it's also for the three of y'all. In thinking about, you talked about how the hierarchies justify the extraction, and that this was part of the critique of ecofeminists and also womanist theologians and theorists. And so I'm wondering if you can speak specifically, what are the theologies that support an extractivist theology? What are the religious practices that are for these practices? So not just naming of the sins, but what are the things that are holding it in place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Jara. So when I teach Christian theology each year for our MDiv students, we start out with an article by Katie Cannon called Cutting Edge. I think it's Christianity or something like that, and the transatlantic slave trade. And she names two kind of theological impulses within Western colonial Christianity that justify and motivate enslavement, mass enslavement of human beings, and also genocide and colonialism. And I would extend that to extractivism. And she names them as like a theological anthropology of racialized normativity. And I think that goes along. And so that's the dualism of, white civilization, Euro-American and European civilization as at the pinnacle. And I think Leonard's kind of reframing of that in terms of coevalness is similar. It's that, that image all the way over here of the pinnacle of the telos, right? That's normativized humanity. That's the norm. And anything that's not so developed or civilized, it's not truly human. It doesn't count as truly human. Let alone the earth, which is even, below all of that in that hierarchy or order of being. So I would say that's one of them. And it's very much alive and well in both, I think, kind of the right-wing white Christian nationalist discourse and the rise of that in the United States and around the world. But also in, I think, even some kind of well-meaning white liberal attempts to kind of help, I guess, for lack of a better word, to make them more like us. And that can sometimes be the case. So that racialized normativity of who counts as human. And the other one is the missiologic of imminent parousia, which says, and especially in relation to hope and eschatology that we've been thinking about, that says, the end is coming. We must spread the gospel at whatever cost, at whatever means possible. And, this is at the root of Western colonialism around the world. And so I'd say those are two that I would start off my theology class with, to say, look, these are ways in which Christian theology has been and continues to be complicit in these evils, including the ecological ones. And of course, ecofeminists and eco-womanists really point to the ways in which really both of those theological constructs place women, and especially women of color, and especially Black women of Africa and the African diaspora, kind of at the nadir, or the bottom of all that, with and even below, the value of the earth. And so those are just some that I would name, but there's volumes that could be written. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I also think it's just past and present terrible readings of Genesis 1. Dominion over the earth, subjugate, subdue, and how that has been worked out through time. I mean, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution are, people like Francis Bacon saying things like, penetrate the holes, go into the crevices. I mean, sexualized imagery of exploiting and harming the earth. The invention of the steamship that made circumnavigation of the globe possible. Now we can go anywhere and extract anywhere because we've been given divine sanction to do that. So that it works itself out in lots of places, past and present, but I think that's one place to think about it.
We want to take one question from the online audience.
Emmanuel, did you want to respond to that last one?
No.
Our question from someone in our live stream audience is for Liz. Thank you for showing us the extractivism model and its problematic operation. If we were to think about extractivism as taking as opposed to giving, it seems to me that the opposite, i.e. throwing away, as in Pope Francis' throwaway culture, is also based on the same operative mindset of extractivism. Could you provide your thoughts on the shared nature between these two?
I love that question. Thank you for the question, whoever you are out there. So if we had more time to get into those wellsprings of particularly indigenous cosmovisions and practices of reciprocity and African heritage religious traditions in the Americas, there are these practices of reciprocity, I think, that speak directly to this question, where we have to take, right? We have human beings to survive. We have to take something from the earth. We have to take plant matter at least, and perhaps animal matter. To eat, to cover ourselves in clothing, to have shelter, to meet our basic needs. And so taking has to happen. But there are within at least, within the Americas, there are the diversity of indigenous cosmovisions and practices is so vast, and I don't want to oversimplify by any means. But indigenous thinkers like George Tinker, for example, will give examples of how when something is taken, there is gratitude given. And there is even a ceremonial aspect of gratitude given for a hunt, for example, or for, a harvest. And so there's that reciprocity of giving back as opposed to simply throwing away, which I think is what the question was trying to get at, is if we just throw away, then it's extract and throw, and throw. But a relationship of reciprocity there is yes, we have to take, we have to live, from the fruits of the earth, but we also have to give back to it. And there's even literal ways in which this is done. One of the practices, the Afro-Indigenous practices that I learned about, that the Garifuna people of the Caribbean coast of Central America practice is, when they harvest, I think it's the cassava, I can't remember, there's a husk, and the husk has to be replanted back down into the earth. Not a seed, but the husk. And so, the food that is taken, there's something given back to the earth for that food. And there are many, many of those practices in these traditions. And so I think that's an example of how the taking can be then a process of also giving back, of reciprocity, and not just throwaway culture that Francis talks about. So thank you for the question.
Thanks all three of you, and especially Prof. Katongole. I've read The Sacrifice of Africa and Born from Lament, and I've been inspired by the way you tell the story of others. And I was wondering, when will he tell his own story like that? So I'm happy to have heard you telling a story of something in Kampala growing up. And for the three of you, I was inspired by what you said, because it gives an aspect of what I was meaning with conviviality this morning. And what I took from what you say is maybe someone died as Ecomartyr, and he doesn't know what will come from his actions. And the question is there someone to continue sing the song? Will someone tell the story? Will someone grieve for what is happening? Will be someone there to tell the story of Alice, and so on and so on. And I think there is some hope there when people can gather and continue telling the story and continue grieving about what is happening. And that's what I take from your three interventions, and thank you. Now a question. You three also mentioned the role or the position of the bishops with the martyr in Latin America, with the bishops not wanting nothing to do with the CCA, or the bishop coming to rescue in Kampala. So my question is, are we here some kind of margin before the margins, or is there a way to bring what we are sharing here to the center of the church? To I don't know how to frame to formulate the whole thing, but is there a way to bring that to some bishops did with they were positively engaged. But when it doesn't work, is there a way to bring all this from the margin to the center of the church? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonard, for the comments and the questions. Yeah, I think the question that you raise at the back of my mind, actually, as I'm thinking about this work, and it's true in all these reflections, you hear echoes of the church, even though we haven't said explicitly about the church. But you hear echoes about the church. The more I think about the work, for example, that is underway at BLI, I think about that work as ecclesiological, as pointing to the very nature of the church and what the church is, or the church is invited to be. But also kind of reflecting the reality of the church as is now, that it is at times affirming, positive, contributing to this work, movement of hope, but also resisting this work of hope at the same time. A case in point in terms of the BLI. This bishop who leased the land ordered his seminarians to come, and the bishop of a neighboring diocese also now saying the seminarians should come. They introduced it in the bishops' conference, and that perhaps the whole of the bishops' conference in Uganda should require seminarians to spend some time at BLI. There was an uproar in the conference. Now this is actually taking out the very formation for which the seminary should be concerned about. This is actually diverting away from the work of formation of the seminarian. And so word even went as far as the nuncio that called even the bishop to say, what is this that I'm hearing, these seminarians? Has this been passed by the bishop's conference? Is this not diverting away? So there is also a lot of others that are saying that no, this is really not the work of the church. This is actually going to divert away from the work of the church. So I think these kind of practices also part of the engagement and the conversational discussion. But what is the church? And I don't think there is one uniform voice. I don't know what it would mean to bring them to the center of the church. Perhaps there is a certain kind of marginality that is always going to be connected to this movement of hope that arise out of these marginal voices, the social movements at the margins. I don't know, but it raises this big question. But that is what I think is also connected to the significance of the community. I like the practice of presenting kind of the community to kind of say, call and say, yes, we remember you, you're one of us, and yeah. And I think whatever is done in terms of hope kind of calls into forth a community, really. And that community, if you ask me, I think it represents a gift of the church as it ought to be. It may not coincide very neatly with the institutional church that we have in place today. But I think they are prophetic illuminations of the church. Perhaps it's the church that is struggling to be born at the margins. But it is nevertheless a radiation of that church. So, yeah, but in the reality of the church today, there is a lot of uneasiness as well with these kind of voices, I'm sure, that arise mostly from these marginalized communities.
I do want to say briefly that The Telling Takes Us Home was published in 2015, the pastoral that no bishop wanted anything to do with. But later that year, John Stowe was appointed the Bishop of Lexington, Kentucky, and he is an absolute champion and compatriot in the work. And he began his entire ministry being a listening presence throughout Appalachia. He's not in my diocese, but I just want to go on record that we do have one bishop. Who cares?
Maybe time for. Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Hello, I am James Punair from Chennai, University of Madras. I'm a fellow here. Just really want to thank all of you. Just to see a connection between the morning panel and this afternoon panel. People are talking about earlier the different dimensions of hope, being moral and spatial. And this afternoon we have very good examples of how that can be true in the lives of the people from Africa, from Latin America, and from America, North America. Thank you so much. I just want to also offer something from Indian side, going with the example of Emmanuel. In India, we have a particular movement, a student movement called Tarumitra. That means the Friends of Trees. There are about 200 young children who are involved in this movement, spread over 1,000 schools. So this is done by Jesuits. It's an excellent place. Maybe Father Emmanuel can learn something from them. It's absolutely amazing work they are doing, impacting the minds of the youngsters. I think that's the way forward to protect the nature of the earth. I have a question here. All of you are talking about, all of us in this particular conference, so far we have been talking about who are the enablers of hope, who are the promoters of hope. But one question that has been absent here is, what is the other side? Who are the disablers of hope? Who are the enemies of hope of today? So I just want to listen to your answer to this question.
Well, I don't know, but I think in the presentation, I kind of feel the sense of some of the detractors. Many of us who have been hooked onto this extractivism.
Extractivism?
That one. Economy, in a way, along the trajectories that I think that you pointed. And we may not even know that we are actually resisting hope because we are so caught up in this economy and its practices, and we think about it in terms of this is the only way to grow an economy, to become successful, or to move out, or get divorced. And but that is kind of written within the very understanding, which is connected, I think, to the earlier discussion this morning about the trajectory, this kind of that we have tended to give about hope, that it grows and grows and grows and coincides with the progress and that sense. So there's so much that is being built into that kind of myth of progress, so that we even understand Christian life as that kind of ongoing development in terms of progress. So we are not even sure that we are detracting away from hope, but we are part of that narrative.
Maybe just a brief response.
Super brief. I mean, one thing I think of is I think one of the ways to think about the opposite of hope, it's not hopelessness or despair, but it's fear. And so I think, like what Dylan described, what's happening at the border around the politics of the Trump administration, it's ruthless, it's vicious, but it's rooted in fear. And I think if we could begin to name that personally, collectively, politically, we might be able to be better bearers of hope.
Yeah. It's a tough question. Left most of us feeling a little speechless, I think, until Emmanuel saved us. There are very specific actors too, who are pulling triggers and, who are heading corporations and investment firms and, banks who are investing in the destruction of hope. But I think both of you pointed to, I look inside and think we all are. I'm a detractor of hope. Wherever there is fear or indifference or complacency in my own life, I think we all have to examine that within each of us.
Thank you for that last response and for all the responses. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much.